Welcome to You've Never Seen It. Thank you all for joining me on my mission to never hear these four words again. I'm your host, Allison Salamone, and joining me today to talk about 2001 A Space Odyssey is former Movie Trivia Schmodown champion and co-host of the YouTube channel and show Champs on Film with Adam Collins and Marisol McKee. You can also find him on Why Are We Like This over on the Video Drew YouTube channel. It is Adam Collins. Boom, 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 boom. Hi, Adam.
Hey, just came wearing some old Schmodown duds. Hope that's okay.
It's perfect.
Not
I love the coyote.
Not in denial at all that it's over. Not at all.
You just wear that every single day of your life. Yeah. It's fine.
I'm not not whittling a belt out of an old oak tree or anything. No, but I felt, given that we're talking about one of my favorite films of all time, I wanted to bring that Turner Classic movie vibe as much as possible.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's great. I think it's fantastic. Mm-hmm. You look wonderful. It's
Thank you
awesome.
so much. Wiley does all the work.
He does. That's what spitting image of him too. It's perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me. I'm excited to have you here. And so the movie we are chatting about today is Stanley Kubrick's 1968, 2001 A Space Odyssey. And the reason I brought you on for this was we did I think it was my birthday stream or some stream here on Flick and Reel, and I saw the poster and I was like, well, clearly we got to talk about this movie. It's been on this You've Never Seen It list that I've had for a hot minute. But before we even get into that, I just want to know a little bit of history about you and just kind of give me the rundown of where your love of film came from. I know we're doing 2001, but are you a big Stanley Kubrick fan, and where did that start? All that fun stuff.
Certainly. I'll try and keep it concise, but I got bit by the cinema bug at a very young age, like a lot of obsessives. And it was due to, frankly, a lot of overexposure to some things maybe I wasn't ready to see. Being of my generation, saw a lot of horror content at an age maybe I definitely wouldn't show my own daughter. But I also had very much older siblings who threw caution to the wind. So it was one of those situations. But by virtue of watching things like Jaws and A Nightmare on Elm Street and Spaceballs and Willow at like a very young age, it gave me like those calluses to kind of like watch more not necessarily adult content, but PG and above. Sure. So I just got into movies beyond Disney movies at a young age. Disney movies too. Love plenty of Disney movies, but and then fast forward to the third grade, Twister came out.
Okay.
Blew my mind. And one scene that blew my mind was the drive-in scene where The Shining is playing on the screen. I was like, what is that movie? And then I sought out The Shining. And I saw The Shining. I was like, whoa. And
in third grade?
Fourth grade. It took me a year to get a hold of The Shining. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I saw The Shining and The Exorcist in fourth grade, which again, I don't recommend for all 10-year-olds, but it worked out for me okay. And
I think it turned out just fine.
Yeah. So I got into The Shining, and I was just fascinated with the obsessiveness of Kubrick's style. Even he was the first director that really made me realize what directors did, and that's because The Shining was just so different than anything I'd ever seen. And then a buddy of mine who I grew up with, because he loved The Shining, he had like a box set of Stanley Kubrick's DVDs and he had barely even gotten into them himself. He just got them as a gift because his brother knew he was into The Shining. So he got him this box set. And so one thing led to another, and I saw 2001 A Space Odyssey within a few years of that. And the first time I saw it, I really couldn't make heads or tails of it. I was in middle school. I was kind of put off by it, as you can imagine. But the thing about 2001 is you revisit it and you revisit it. And it is the movie that, to this day, I rewatched it, or mostly rewatched it before this. I've seen it countless times. But I got through about half of my rewatch before I came onto the show. And even now, my life experience is framing the way I'm experiencing the movie. And that's the case with all movies, but 2001 especially covers the entire spectrum of human existence. So
Mhm.
it has it. Yeah, that's that's the short version, Allison.
That's the
Yeah.
and I I can I appreciate that, but I mean, I could listen to you just talk about it for however long you needed to. If we need to have a full wax poetic therapy session, that's what I'm here for. That's why I do this.
We're working up to it now.
We are perfect. So then, yeah, I guess like you kind of covered briefly, but if there's more to it, what why 2001: A Space Odyssey? What is it about this movie that has you? Because there's a lot of people, and I mean, I'll get into my own feelings there, but not a whole lot of people are enjoy revisiting this movie in general.
It can be a tough pill to swallow and an
Yeah.
acquired taste. And for many people, they're turned off to it. I have a lot of peers whom I respect who can appreciate the craftsmanship of this movie, but aren't
Hmm.
necessarily swept up by what it's trying to say or what it's
Hmm.
trying to evoke, in my opinion. But for me, because I saw it and I saw it again, and it got better every single time I saw it, and it's a movie that I continue to revisit, and it's always teaching me lessons. That's why it's one of my favorite films. It's the fact that we're 2 decades past the expiration date of the movie, and
Yeah.
that it's still revealing things not only about our relationships with technology, but our concept of where we are as a species. And it's just it's so incredibly influential. Not that that makes it like like I think people have to just arbitrarily like this movie, but
Sure.
the influence is everywhere, across science fiction to this day. People are still grasping at their versions of this kind of movie. You look at things like Interstellar and Ad Astra, and those movies have some interesting stuff in them, but they really are, in my opinion, trying to get at what 2001 already did in a less interesting way. um, so that's, I could go on.
No, that makes sense. I mean, and you bring up like I haven't seen Ad Astra, but I have seen Interstellar, and I can definitely see where that kind of parallel would come in. And you mentioned trying to do what 2001 already did, but and I think what's more amazing about what 2001 did is what Kubrick was able to achieve in 1968. I think
Hmm.
that is something that you can't ignore about this movie. There's a reason why people think he filmed the moon landing, and now I
Yeah.
know why.
Very much. I like that conspiracy theory holds water because of the production value of this movie.
Mhm.
And also beyond that, Kubrick was doing things that NASA wasn't even doing yet. And his imagination led them to consider, new approaches to things. But what fascinates me is when you look at this, um, the fact that he was able to conceptualize what Earth would look like from space before it
Mhm.
was photographed the way we know it now is pretty amazing. The fact that you can look at this and his approximation of Earth as a planet is fairly accurate to this day. All the things that are more analog or arguably outdated about this movie, I think they hold up really well because they're analog. And I feel like 2001, if interpreted as a literal year within the framework of this movie, especially in the age of popular multiverse theory and all that kind of stuff, it's easy to conceptualize this was one version of that year that we didn't experience in our timeline,
Mhm.
but it's completely believable that we would have achieved that if we had our act together enough to focus on this kind of technology. Because back in the 60s, this is where they thought we were going to be, and it's where we could be if we were in sync.
For sure. I always think it's really interesting watching movies from like older movies and when the year like we have 2001 or one of the earlier episodes I did of this podcast in Blade Runner, we were already have passed 2019 when that was
Yeah,
taking place and what they thought the world was going to be like or the dystopian future there. And it's so it's so I don't know, it makes me laugh because I'm like what people wanted to imagine where we would be and we're like probably and we're still having some of the same problems that they were having in 1968 that hasn't changed,
yeah.
right? Like we're still fighting the stupidest things in the universe that we shouldn't be dealing with at this point in time, but we're still doing in as we did in 1968. So that's wild to me. I think that's a really interesting concept. um I do have to say, Do you know, I mean, I was trying to do some research to be somewhat professional, but do you know, has anyone ever like given an exact amount of time for like the amount of dialogue that's in this 2.5 hour movie?
You can look up the numbers. I
Mhm.
can't speak to the specificity of how much dialogue, but what's amazing is for a movie that you is so visual, when
Mhm.
you go back and watch it, if you're actually paying attention to how much dialogue there is, there's more than you'd realize. It's pretty front loaded with a lot of dialogue, which does a great job of setting up exposition for where we're at
Mhm.
as a society, as a species. You're able to infer so much from that moon base rundown, essentially, where
Yeah.
Dr. Haywood Floyd, the character from the opening, who Skypes with his daughter, it's just
Yeah.
it's the technology is all there. It's just a different version of what we ended up getting.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Um, he does such a good job of setting the tone so that like you have a good idea of, hey, there's something we found on the moon. We can't quite explain it. And then when you get there and you realize it ties back to the prologue with prehistoric man.
Mhm.
This movie to me, the reason I return to it so much as well, and I realize this even more so watching it this time, is this is in very many ways a horror film. Um,
Yeah.
it kind of defies genre, but there's so much about this movie that's unsettling and spooky.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All I knew coming into this movie is the scene just is what ends up being just a small part of it, but everything with HAL 9000. That's all I knew
Yeah,
from 2001: A Space Odyssey. I knew nothing else. But that's the part that I think, and of course, like the intro music, the dun dun dun, dun, like
yeah,
I knew that from it too, but I thought it was I coming into this movie, I thought I was gonna be watching two people going back and forth with a computer in space for 2.5 hours, and that is not at all what I got.
that's one part of it. That's one
That's
part of
what
it.
and it happened and then the part that about that people that I guess are is one of the more iconic parts that everyone talks about when, Dave's asking Hal to open the pod bay door. You come back from that intermission and it's right there. And then I was like, well, what do we do now? Like
Yeah,
that's the part I was waiting for. Now it's done. Now I have another hour of film left. Like, what are we gonna do next? Where do we
yeah.
go?
After things hit the fan, and
Mhm.
and the way Kubrick maintains tension throughout this film is pretty amazing to me because I think the prologue sets a very ominous tone, not just
Mhm.
with the musical choices, which are eerie as hell and so effective, but these are existing, for the most part, this is all existing music,
Mhm.
classical pieces. The Blue Danube was used famously in this in the opening, and like so much famous music. And as far as I'm aware, one reason he implemented that for the score was not so much that it was public domain, but to on one hand illustrate the timelessness of the music and the concept of space itself. But what I love is space is silent, and
Mhm.
and some of the most effective movies, including this one, understand how to use that silence. But if we were to just dwell in it the entire time, we'd get a little bit lost. And just the rhythm of the music and the pacing of the opening all the way through when we catch up with the astronauts on the Jupiter mission. I just think that first hour of the film is literal poetry in motion.
Yeah. It's definitely it again, like I had no idea what I was getting into with it. I'm seeing people dressed as they're back when like, we were apes and but no, you're right. It does set that tone because I mean, it's 1968. We're
Mm-hmm.
going full spoilers. I'm pretty sure people listening to this have already seen it. So,
Yeah,
when you're setting the tone in that whole first opening prologue where it's early man, the giant monolith shows up. It shows these uh hu- these human monkey people um
prehistoric men.
prehistoric man.
Whether they're
That's what we'll call them.
Neanderthals, Cro-Magnon,
He just like
yeah.
put them all together.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, here's what it could have been, but it sets up where they get driven away from the watering hole that they found by another group, and
It's like
then
West Side
learned how.
Story, kind of in the
Yeah,
beginning, yeah. With these
let's
ape
be
men,
let's
yeah,
right. Sharks and the
yeah.
Jets. There was
Mm-hmm.
not enough snapping, a lot of jumping though. It looked like they were dancing.
The musical version of this would be astounding. Yeah,
It would be
yeah.
that I'd pay to see that. I would see that.
Mm-hmm.
I would definitely
Mm-hmm.
be into. But yeah, so they get driven away, learn how to use bones as tools, and then essentially weapons, and
Yeah.
then kill one of the other prehistoric men, so those people chase away. And if that's not setting the tone for what you're about to see as we evolve, I don't know what is.
And then you jump cut to the space station floating. One of the most
Yeah.
famous jump cuts of all time. Beautiful. And just, it should give you whiplash, but you're suddenly immersed in the present. And it also lends so much menace to what you're seeing, as intoxicating as it is, with the music and the presentation of these structures and everything. The symmetry of it is incredible. And like, I'm watching it and I'm just thinking in the back of my mind, yeah, but the monolith taught the ape men how to kill. And I feel like that's all lingering behind this. And as we know, it is, as we close the gap with the story with Hal, it's amazing. Right. The symmetry in this film. It's so incredibly layered and clear without preaching to you.
Right, exactly. And with Hal, you have, so because now we're making a sentient computer, we've programmed this computer to follow through with the mission at any cost, which we learn includes killing people, because as the two astronauts start to realize that Hal might be lying, but because Hal is keeping the actual objective of this mission a secret and has to do what he has to do for it. Now Hal's like, well, y'all got to go. Like, I'm still going to go to Jupiter and figure this out, but see you guys later, which is horrifying. That and again, we still haven't learned to stop making technology smarter. Like, you think we would by now.
Exactly. And Hal is where a lot of this started. I mean, there's things before Hal. Like, if you go back to films like Metropolis and The Day the Earth Stood Still, there are things before Hal. But Hal, I think, is what really, cemented the idea of AI as something that can evolve. And we've had countless things since then, Terminator, Alien, all this stuff.
Yeah, the voice is terrifying.
I know.
With Hal, too. Like, it's absolutely horrifying,
because it's not without emotion. The emotion's incredibly subtle, but it's there, and that's what's so creepy, both the way he's threatening and the way he's scared.
Yes, that's what I was about to talk about, is that whole scene where he's going and he's in the mainframe to basically shut Hal down, and he's like, stop, Dave, stop. A computer telling you he's scared and you can hear it, and it's just so slight, was like, that part really did, as it did for, I'm sure, it just had it literally just, that's where I was kind of like I literally felt myself holding my breath for that whole
that entire scene where he dismantles Hal is so, it works on so many levels, because it's a necessity at that point in the narrative. It's kill or be killed. And Hal, we know as an audience, we should want Hal to go. What happened to Frank Poole, dumping him out there, that shot of him, because we're going full spoilers. The movie's, the movie's old, guys. Let's be real here. It's 54 years old. So, but like that shot of Frank Poole spinning, so terrifying. It's just that so hopeless. And then you can understand why Bowman is so upset and so fixated on dismantling Hal. But the process of doing it is so gradual and so weirdly intimate. And the way Hal is reacting to it and saying, I can feel myself going.
Mhm.
and there's a necessity to it, but it feels so grotesque, even though nothing violent's happening. It's a computer, but it feels so
Yeah.
perverse.
Yes, for
Yeah.
absolutely. And it's done so because it's done. It's because you have to. It also it has to be so. He's in space and he's in zero gravity. You're going to be
Mm-hmm.
moving slower. And I think that whole scene too with Frank out and spinning in space again, just the simple sound editing in
Yeah.
film with the film is done because you're hearing
Grasping.
this heavy. Yeah, you hear this heavy breathing all throughout that slow that like just of being in the suit and then it's done and he's just floating and it's complete silence like nothing. I think what it's very clear what was done in the filmmaking process is I understand why this movie can be as revered as it is,
Mm-hmm.
but I also feel like I have to say it is it's so boring. Like
Look, hey, hey, look, I get it. I get it.
I don't mean that like in a mean way. Like I get it, but like for I think because I didn't have an idea coming into it of like what because again, my idea was I knew this one part of it where there's HAL 9000 and I've heard about the suspense. Like as I'm watching this movie, I'm going, okay, what's gonna what do we what happens next? And like the shots that are just it's just it's very it's little for on a first time watch, it's little boring. I can't like
look, hey, trust me, you are leaps and bounds beyond a lot of people's first reviews I've heard. I have peers who will remain unnamed, who have come to me in the past few years saying they've seen 2001 for the first time, and it was crap. And I'm like, all right,
yeah.
you need to go. You need to take a walk, and I need to take a walk
Shame
before
them.
we
Name
come back.
them
Yeah,
now. Let's go.
no, 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 no.
Shame. I'm just
I'm
kidding.
not gonna out them. Not right now. But the thing is, that's how I felt when I first saw it back in the day. And it wasn't even so much about my age; it was about digesting it. I was like, what? What? I had no
Yeah.
idea what I had just seen. And then, as I said earlier, revisiting it, it becomes clearer and clearer over time. Now, my relationship also changed because the movie it made me so inquisitive that
Hmm.
I had to know more. I didn't need to know what it literally meant, but I just needed to know more. And so I read the book that was written concurrently with the script. And that's what a lot of people don't
Okay.
talk about with this movie. Arthur C. Clarke wrote the novel at the same time Kubrick was making the film. And it's not an adaptation. They were written concurrently for the most part.
Gotcha.
But the thing about the novel, and that's unlike anything ever, pretty much. Like
Yeah.
that's very unique. It wasn't he didn't write it as a novelization of the film. They were working together. Arthur C. Clarke was on set for the movie, and the novel's more clear about a lot of the story elements.
Sure.
And then what's interesting as well is there's 3 sequels to the original novel. They adapted
Okay.
one of those into a film, 2010, the year we made contact. Um,
Okay.
yeah, so that's a film from the 80s, directed uh, by oh my god, I'm shaming myself. Uh,
It's been a long time. It's okay.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
been
yeah. Forgive me, I am owning my failure here. Uh, but yeah, it is directed by Peter Hyams. Duh.
okay.
Okay. The movie's on my shelf, but I haven't watched it in a few years. So Peter Hyams directed the sequel in the 80s, and that movie is interesting, but it's a very literal movie, whereas 2001 is more conceptual.
Right.
And so if you want to know more about the monolith and Hal and the astronauts, you can watch that movie and learn more about what was literally happening in this. But the literal story is just scratching the surface in 2001.
Hmm.
So the thing that I love so much about it is what it evokes. And when I watch it, especially that final stretch, Jupiter and Beyond the Infinite, all bets are off. And I'm
Yeah.
interested to see how did that strike you once we got past Hal and we entered the Infinite and it became just an experience. What did you think?
Yeah. Um I think again, I'm like, what's going on? Like, what's like, and again, I came in having the understanding that I knew this whole thing was like, again, a feat in filmmaking. I knew that this is one of those films where the things that Kubrick did, it's kind of, I think I kind of compared it in a way to how, like what Orson Welles did with Citizen Kane and
Mm,
the cutting edge and the leaps in filmmaking that were made from that movie. We're now taking it to the nth degree with this one and watching it. And then it's like, it's colors and it's lights and it's flashbacks and it's this. And I just sat there because it's, like it feels like it's like a whole 10-minute long scene of just descending into and I was just, it was wild to watch. But again, in my head,
yeah.
I'm like, I'm like, what's going on again? Like, what are we doing? Where are we at? What's happening?
And then you end up in that bedroom.
Yeah.
And that's once you're there, you're like, okay, all right, so how much time has passed? What is like, but if you're trying to figure out what's literally taking place, like I think what's so cool about that final stretch of the movie is that it is incredibly bizarre and experimental, and
Mm.
at first glance it might just seem off-putting and weird, but when you step back and think about how we know so little about the intelligence behind the monolith, behind
Yeah.
what's motivating what's happening, it would only make sense that it's trying to approximate something as far as this human being is concerned, so that once it's transcended whatever crazy trip this guy's been on, he has to arrive at some point of familiarity. He has to be somewhere that at least looks like something he knows. And I just I find it fascinating that this poor astronaut has to go to the end of the universe and sort of implode it within himself.
Yeah.
It really covers everything. Like trying to articulate everything this film covers is a monumental task.
Yes. And it's a lot of, I mean, it's very, I feel like so when it comes to Kubrick films, I've now seen four. I've seen Doctor Strangelove, which I think
Mm.
is one of my, I highly enjoy that one. I've always really liked that one. That's probably, if people said, what's your favorite Kubrick film out of the ones you've seen? It would be Doctor Strangelove and the first half of Full Metal Jacket. Like, because the second
I
after
got
they
thoughts
leave,
about that, but yeah, but Doctor Strangelove's a perfect film. It's perfect.
it's really good. I need to revisit. I haven't watched it in a long time, but I do want to revisit that one. And then I've seen, and now because of this podcast, I've seen The Shining and 2001: A Space Odyssey. Um but it's Kubrick being, I guess it's Kubrick in a way. Like it really boils down to either, I feel like people either, he's one of those directors, like you either love what he's doing or it's just not your bag or your cup of tea for the most part. And I feel like I'm on the other side of like, I get what he's doing, but I don't know if it's my cup of tea, which probably explains why I like the ones that I like.
I completely understand where you're coming from, and you say you've seen four of his films so far, and I'll be honest, a lot of my revisiting of 2001, a lot of what enhanced my perspective of it was familiarizing myself with his other films,
Sure.
and also just getting more time to live with the movie. The once you know it and it has time to kind of seep in, I am confident that hopefully you revisit this movie in the next year or two, and I think you'll like it more. I really do,
Yeah.
because you have to you have to just kind of break yourself in with a movie like this. It's another reason why I love the films of David Lynch, because the uninitiated with David Lynch, the first time they see a David Lynch movie, they're like, okay, all right, so he's just doing random stuff. No, he's not doing random stuff. He's just not doing a narrative the way you're used to. He's presenting it a different
Sure.
way. And Kubrick was very similar. And yet leading up to this, he did very straightforward films. So like when I got into his filmography, I own every single movie he's made. But like you go back to his early movies and things like Kiss and The Killing were more film
Mhm.
noirs. Paths of Glory was a very poignant anti-war film, and then Spartacus was his big budget audition to kind of prove to Hollywood that he could be a proven commodity. Like if you give him money, he can make something that's quality. And Spartacus is his most straightforward movie that he's ever made, in my opinion. And it's good,
Okay.
but it's also not like it's not as inquisitive as his other movies are. And then that's why after that he did Lolita and Doctor Strangelove, which are just him getting carte blanche to do everything he wants in a movie, to really push the envelope with satire, with wit, with darkness. And so after Doctor Strangelove, he'd achieved this satirical masterpiece with that. Like,
Mhm.
it's just so brilliant, so funny. And I can appreciate that he wanted to tackle where we were going as a species with space exploration, but let the visuals speak more than the dialogue, because Doctor Strangelove is such a dialogue-driven film.
Yeah.
And then his follow-up to this, A Clockwork Orange, is also a very dialogue-driven film, a movie that is celebrated by countless people, and it's a very good film. But I think 2001 fits in this very special place where it's less about the people and more about existence than any
Mhm.
of his other movies. And I think the more you watch his movies, the more symmetry you'll see across his style, because The Shining and 2001 line up in so many ways. I was just telling Marisol earlier today that one thing I love is there's that repeating shot in 2001 of the monolith, the upward
Yeah.
shot of the monolith with the sun or the planets. And there's a very similar shot in The Shining where we're looking up at Jack when he's locked in the pantry and he
Mhm.
looks
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
crazed. And Kubrick had a tendency for that kind of angle. I yeah, 2001 is going to strike a lot of people as boring on a first watch because it's so deliberately paced and so not literal that
Right.
it can be a little bit of a tough nut to crack on the first outing.
Sure. Appreciate you not being offended by my
Not remotely, not remotely. I'm just glad you're interested
Yeah,
because
and I
that's
mean,
the first step.
I think from, again, the standpoint of this is a movie where you're letting the visuals speak for itself. It was nominated for 4 Academy Awards, won Kubrick the award for best visual effects,
Yep,
for, with an Oscar. So,
only Oscar he ever
which
won.
but and it makes sense
Yeah,
that for these visual effects, especially, I mean, I didn't do enough digging to see like what it was up against, but I don't think you're gonna beat anything else. Like this had to be a given the time and the stuff they did. I want to know, and I need to do again more research, the tools and how he did things when the stewardess was going and delivering the food. I thought that one shot was so cool where she starts walking and she's just walking up and around and now she's upside down and going in,
yeah,
and like that was just I was like,
mind
where is
blowing.
he? Yeah.
So a lot of what he did in this film continues to be used to this day. Christopher Nolan's very outspoken about how obsessed he is with Kubrick, like a lot of filmmakers are, and his that uh, amazing scene in Inception, the fight scene in the rotating hallway,
Yeah.
that's done very similarly to the space station scenes in 2001. So like the space station scene where Frank is running, jogging,
Hmm.
that is in an actual rotating hamster wheel set. And the
That's
camera
cool.
is calibrated to rotate in time with it, so it all looks like fluid motion. And then similarly, they did a similar thing for the stewardesses in. They were still called stewardesses in the '60s, guys.
Yes, they were.
Um, but the Pan Am stewardesses are filmed in a similar way. And then there's some other like cool visual tricks, like the floating pen was a pane of glass. But what I still don't understand to this day is how she's able to pick up the pen and it's utterly seamless.
Yes,
I
that.
understand the concept of using glass, but the way she picks up that pen is just
Hmm.
so
I
cool.
also read that for like the floating scenes, the way that he angled for when the astronaut would then be in the zero gravity and the floating, it was using wires, but the way that he had would film them and filming them from underneath. So when they would pass over, the actual like body and how they were situated would block out the wires, so you couldn't see it. But
He was
that's
so precise.
mm-hmm.
He would block out the shots, like you were saying, so that he would know mathematically like how to anticipate that stuff, so that like
Yeah.
when he would cross a certain visual barrier, that stuff would be hidden to the naked eye. Um, the Museum of the Moving Image in Queens.
Mm-hmm.
I've been there a few times. All the New York Schmodown events, I would make a point of going there because they always rotated exhibits.
Yeah.
And up until recently, they had an amazing 2001 exhibit. So you
Oh,
can
that's
see a
cool.
lot of the miniatures from the film, a lot of the storyboards, just lots of cool stuff from the production, and it's quite amazing because you look at this film, and the only thing that's dated about it is the fact that we know it came out in the 60s. Beyond that, everything holds up incredibly well. And you look at this, and you can just see the direct influence on Star Wars, like all of the ships, the way they're filmed, all the miniatures, just the scope of it, the scale of it.
Mm-hmm.
George Lucas ran with that visual design for Star Wars and turned it into fun pulp. And I
Yeah.
think that's why when people go back and watch 2001, it can be a little tough to navigate because we're used to things like Star Wars and Star Trek. But even Star Trek, when the motion picture came out in '79, it was trying to emulate a lot of what 2001 was doing. And that's why it didn't
Mm-hmm.
land at the time, because people had just seen Star Wars and they wanted to see more space adventures. And then Star Trek, the motion picture, comes out and it tries to be all cerebral. And people are like, what is this? This
Yeah.
is, so, yeah.
No, perhaps that makes, and I think that's kind of one of those things. I'm really glad that this is movies like this and conversations like this is why I started this podcast and this show, because I one don't think I would have seen 2001 Space Odyssey for any other reason other than having it on a list to do a show like this and talk about it with someone like you who loves it, honestly. But I'm glad that it took something like this because I, at this point in my life and how I am in my journey through film, I'm much more appreciative of what's happening in it. So I think if Allison even 2 years ago sat down and watched this movie, I'd have turned it off within the first. I know I would have turned it off within like the first 15 minutes. I'd be like, the fuck am I watching? I'm all done. You know,
And
like I
yeah.
would have, and I think that is kind of, it's an interesting idea because really the people who love this movie for so many different reasons. And the people who I've at least met now that don't like it for my pretty much the reason why I said it, that what stood out a lot with me with the length and the boringness in a way, but have the appreciation for what Kubrick did. And I think that is so important to note because, like you said, so many people are still pulling from that technology and from, Kubrick
Mhm.
building the giant centrifuge you could equate that to, James Cameron and his giant pools for The Abyss
It's
and
an excellent
Titanic.
comparison. It's an
Yeah.
excellent comparison. James Cameron is like as influenced by Kubrick as any of them, but he took what Kubrick was doing in principle
Hmm.
and ran with it in his own creative way. Cameron's an obsessive and a perfectionist, much like Kubrick was, but in service of a different kind of storytelling, which is great.
Sure.
But I've always respected the obsessiveness of James Cameron, and I think that always translates when a
Hmm.
filmmaker is just possessed by what they need to put on camera. It
Hmm.
translates in such an interesting way, and
Yeah.
I think no matter even when people don't love 2001 the first time they see it, I haven't ever heard of anyone walking away from that movie like, well, it looked like crap. Like,
No, exactly. No,
not
you
going to
can't.
happen. It's not going to
You
happen.
can't. And now that because I think I had this, I obviously went in with an expectation because of what I knew. So so I can say without a doubt, I went in with a bit of a bias with this movie, with an expectation of what I thought I was going to see, and it's
Mhm.
not at all what I ended up seeing, except for like that one scene that I knew about. But I I can understand what you're saying and appreciate the idea that it's possible on another on a rewatch down the road, I'll probably have a different viewpoint with it. I just need to make sure I put myself in the right headspace to do it because
Also, not for nothing. Don't know where you stand on this kind of recreation, but if you sync up Jupiter and Beyond the Infinite with Echoes by Pink Floyd, and you
okay.
drop an edible early enough in the film, if you sync that up and it lands at the right moment, you're going to go on a very fun ride. So just take that
Okay,
for
I
what it
will.
is. Yeah. Echoes by Pink Floyd and Jupiter Beyond the Infinite. There's a specific point to sync it up, just like Wizard of Oz and Dark Side
Uh-huh.
of the Moon, but
I'm
it's
into
worth it.
this.
Yeah.
I
Echoes is
That
like,
might be my rewatch.
for the uninitiated, Echoes is like a 20-minute plus Pink Floyd epic song that's just a jammer of,
This is
yeah.
great.
So,
I'm into this. I'm
yeah,
into this.
worth
Drop it.
checking out.
I mean, dropping an edible, I'm fine doing any time.
There
So
you go.
you don't
Most
have to
people are
convince
these
me.
days. Um, uh,
You don't have to convince me on that one.
uh, Marisol and I, one thing we love talking about is when you watch 90s movies and characters call out the fact that it's the 90s to
Yes.
like show how modern it is. And like one of my favorite call outs is in Mrs. Doubtfire when he's doing that running back and forth in the restaurant and he's getting drunk off his ass because he's pounding scotch. And he
Yeah.
gets back and his boss is like, "Does your girlfriend have a girlfriend?" And Robin Williams is like, "Hey, it's the 90s."
Yeah.
Um,
We're
I
so
want,
progressive.
yeah, like you're like
Yeah.
when people are like, yeah, I like edibles. I'm like, hey, it's the 2020s or just the 20s. We can say
Just
that
the
now.
20. We can
Yeah,
say that now. It's just the 20s.
yeah,
That's amazing. So I take it you have seen all like Kubrick's entire filmography. Do you
yep.
have
I own them all.
is 2001 your favorite, or do you have like what is your top 3 for
Yeah.
his films?
In no certain order. Well, I guess 2001 kind of is at the top of the pecking order, just because it's so rare that a movie encapsulates all of existence.
Yeah.
And that's why it's just I can't stop obsessing over it.
Mhm.
But The Shining is right there, and Barry Lyndon,
Okay.
and Doctor Strangelove are also right there. So it's kind of I'm kind of cheating. There's kind of a top 4, but I love all of his films to varying degrees. I think everything from The Killing on is pretty much masterful in
Okay.
to different extents, and his only things before that that were they were as he was getting started out. So Killer's Kiss is a bit more of an amateur film, and then
Mhm.
he's disowned his work before that, even though
Gotcha.
We Won't Let It Die. But everything from like The Killing on, the guy just he was special.
Yeah.
He pioneered the art like Orson Welles did, and those guys just they understood how unique an art form it was, and they helped create the language. Literally, like you brought up Citizen Kane, which is a very good comparison because the reason Citizen Kane holds up as much as it does is because of how dynamically it's put together. It's got
Yeah.
great acting, great dialogue, but visually, it's the movie's alive, and that's how I
It
feel about 2001.
when I talked about it on the probably one of my it was one of my very first episodes. I got a chat with William Bibiani on Citizen Kane. I mean,
Oh, I
the
can't even imagine him talking about Citizen
oh,
Kane.
it was good. It's a good one. But I one thing I mentioned him about that movie and like in that filmmaking and what was done with it is the fact that Orson Welles wanted everything to be in focus.
Yeah,
So like the way at so literally how clear these all these settings were and how in focus everything was. It's almost I was watching, I'm like, wait, is this remastered? Are we like in 4K, like HD, like how like because how everything looks real, like really real, not just a set. Like
yeah.
that blew my mind. And but it also, I think the comparison too that you had to make with it is you have these groundbreaking things that they've done in the movies, but both of those films were not very well received or revered when they were released.
No, Citizen Kane got the complete shaft.
Yeah.
How Green Was My Valley beat it for Best Picture, and that movie's not bad. It gets a bum rap because it's kind of sentimental and maudlin and all that, but it's a
Mhm.
solid John Ford drama. It's
Yeah.
just that Citizen Kane, and
Right.
and that you watch Citizen Kane and you are instantly back in that time frame. You are there,
Mhm.
and that's what the best movies do, especially now that we can restore them. The the most recent like transfers of Casablanca, like you feel like the veil is lifted. You feel like you're
Yeah.
there, and in a
Yeah.
very good way. And when I watched 2001, I just I'm amazed with how like confident it is in its presentation of space travel and where we're headed with the technology. And even though certain things don't line up with where we ended up, like I mentioned, the overall uh, uh, trajectory is there. You know, a lot
Yeah.
of what we ended up achieving as a society is represented in 2001. And when it comes down to Hal, I mean, I think we're seeing it to this day. I think that's the most effective AI gone bad story because it is not a robot coming to beat you up or shoot you with machine guns. He is a silent killer in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
He's just so he's so zealous,
Yeah.
and that's a human quality. It's not unique to
Mhm.
AI, and we see that manifested in the Alien movies a tenfold with every single android they've ever had,
Yeah.
and that's effective too. But I almost think seeing it stripped down and just having that eye of Hal's makes it so eerie because he's threatening and he's vulnerable, like I said earlier, at the
It's
same time.
that close up of that red, like that
Mm-hmm.
red dot is
Yeah,
it's very, very menacing. And it is so weird how you start to feel bad. I mean, I at least had started to feel bad a little bit with Hal, even though what he was doing was not good. So with this movie, what would you say are your top three just moments in this film?
yeah,
Your top three just favorite things that happen?
sure. So my first favorite moment comes early on in the film, and it's it's more of a drawn out moment, but it
Mhm.
is when the prehistoric men wake up one morning and the monolith has arrived, and it's
Mhm.
that gradual realization. It's the way they saunter up to it, the way they react to it. It's not only the dawn of their intelligence, but it also is so representative of, in my opinion, a lot of, religious zeal that we see.
Mhm.
Like it only makes sense that they're getting this intelligence all of a sudden. They would almost deify this monolith. They would almost worship it in a way, even if they didn't realize they were. And I just love that moment can capture intelligence and education, but
Mhm.
also the idea of uh, religious dedication and an overzealous commitment to something that you can't explain. Um, and then when you jump ahead, um, I really enjoy. This might be a little silly, but I just got to
No,
shout it out. I just got to
of
shout it
course.
out. I'm not going to say it's one of my favorite moments of the film, but I want to shout it out just so that people pay attention to it. The moment where Dr. Haywood Floyd is examining dutifully the instructions for the space toilet.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, I love that's one of the small moments of humor in this movie
Yeah.
that's not overplayed, and it's very very unique to Kubrick. But I just love the way Haywood Floyd's like rubbing his chin. He's like, "Oh yes, okay, all right. So gravity's a concern. All right, need to make sure I'm centered properly. Okay.
Yeah.
And what's cool, I also I look at that a little bit differently now because ever since I went to that exhibit in at the museum in Queens, they had that actual placard from the film on
Oh,
display.
that's
So I was
cool.
able to like look at it in person and do the Haywood Floyd consideration and
Yeah.
all that. So that's really cool. But then if you want to jump ahead a little bit, I think one of the most incredibly edited sequences in the entire film is when Hal is reading their lips.
Yeah.
And it's you don't need to know what they're saying at that point. It doesn't matter. You know what the end result's going to be.
Hmm.
And the fact that it lingers on it for so long and you're forced into Hal's perspective, you start realizing how narrow his perspective is, how isolated he is as an entity of intelligence, and what's scary about that is it becomes so clear in that moment as he's obsessing over their lip reading.
Hmm.
A personality like that, that's that isolated and that cut off and that coerced into service, you realize all in one moment that he's capable of anything,
Yeah.
and it scares the hell out of me. It really does.
Who knew that he could read lips, right? Like they think they're doing like their Sal just hears everything, but like that the fact that like he got either he was programmed to be able to do it or again did the technology just evolve to
Well,
where he had like in time as a sentient being, like did he just figure it out on his own without having that programmed in?
and we're seeing that to this day to bring it back full circle. I don't know if you got up to theaters this past week, but I went and saw Megan.
I have
Um,
not seen Megan yet, but I need to. But yeah.
and it's fun. It's worth seeing. It's a hoot. But a lot of people already forgot that in 2019 there was a Child's Play remake that came out, and then that version of Child's Play, Chucky is an AI doll gone bad, much like Megan.
Gotcha.
But what both movies do well is they are totally in the spirit of HAL 9000,
Hmm.
and they both come from a perspective of fulfilling the mission, following protocol. But then once you reach a certain points of sentience, you got to start asking some questions. And
Hmm.
Hal has that, AI Chucky has that, and Megan has that.
Yeah. Yeah. Stop making technology smart. Like it's great for movies, but like the fact that we're also still making technology more and more smart. Like I'm gonna have like six. I'm now whenever I scroll on Facebook because we've mentioned Megan, that trailer's gonna be like right there because
Oh
the
yeah,
phone's listening.
oh yeah, it's listening. And also in the age of Teslas,
Yeah.
go back and watch Stephen King's Maximum Overdrive, where cars come to life and kill everybody. That tells you
Or
everything you need to
yeah,
know. Yeah.
100%. So and then what would you do you have so um yeah, I would say I that the lip reading scene definitely. I still think one of my favorite things just with this movie is watching the flight attend the space attendant, I
Yeah.
guess, just walking upside down and not realizing. I think what was so masterful about that shot is for the longest time you don't realize what she's doing
Right.
until she gets to a certain point and you're like, oh, is that like a like what? And then she goes through, but like when I saw her just, it looked like she was just walking in place for a good like it felt like 2 or 3 minutes of like just in one.
Mm-hmm.
I think the more I honestly, and that's why again why I love this show so much. The more that I'm talking with you about this movie, the more I'm starting to grow and appreciate the length of these scenes, knowing how purposeful
Mm-hmm.
it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I mean, Kubrick was one of the most deliberate filmmakers who ever lived, and he never had one sequence or shot that happened by accident. And he was obsessive to the point of alienating people. Harvey Keitel left production of Eyes Wide Shut because Kubrick pissed him off and made him like enter a room like 100 times, and
Yeah,
Keitel was like, "All right, I'm out. I
yeah.
can't with this guy anymore." And
Or
I
I mean,
I get it.
The Shelley Duvall of the
Oh
show with how he that whole one scene that he made her do over and over and over
well,
again, just the torture.
she's basically said she retired from acting because of The
Yeah,
Shining, more or less, and that's very sad in a way.
it is.
But at the same time, I'm not worried about litigating Kubrick as an individual. The guy
Right.
was an artist. He made amazing work. He didn't kill anybody. That's
There you
kind of
go.
where I land on it, and I love
He's
his films.
I mean, but and these types, these Hollywood type, like a lot of them are assholes. Like you're not making 2001: A Space Odyssey because you're good with people. You know what I mean?
Kubrick didn't have the best bedside manner by from most accounts, and I'm
Yeah,
not that concerned about it. Like if I ever
yeah,
met Stanley Kubrick, I wouldn't be like, "Hey, you want to grab a beer?" Because he'd tell me to go to hell, and that'd
right.
be and I wouldn't be offended by that. I'd
Yeah,
understand. Whereas like a filmmaker who's still alive, who I very much admire, Werner Herzog. He's a little more friendly. Like he's
mhm,
very dark, but he's more interested in talking to people than Kubrick was. So
sure.
it just depends. Like people
Yeah,
say, don't meet your heroes. You know what? Sometimes your heroes need space and they don't want to meet you. And
right.
that's not their fault.
Don't be mad at them because they don't want to. It's just it is
Yeah.
what it is.
Let them exist. Yeah.
For sure. Well, I guess with all of that, I think we're at a good point where I can go into my letterbox and label that I watched it and
Oh
do
boy, here we go.
my star
It
my
is in one
one
of
through
my
five stars.
top it's in my top rated films on my profile. I've got
Sure.
2001. I've got Blue Velvet. I
Okay.
have Dead Man, which you see the N from the poster right here,
Yes.
from Jim Jarmusch. Great Western. People go watch it. And then Sideways, which I think me and Mark Riley are the two most obsessed people in the world with that movie.
I know I need to Mark Riley had mentioned to me before in like a Patreon thing that he wants to come on the show to talk
Have
about that
Oh
one.
God, do yourself a favor, have him on to talk about it, because I felt I was the preeminent Sideways obsessive of the world, and then
Aw.
Riley and I, about a year ago, we duked it out and we did a Sideways video chronic quiz, and he beat me. He beat me by one
Sure.
question, but he beat
Oh
me.
man.
So have him on for Sideways. He's
Definitely.
talking about that movie with that man is a pleasure.
Oh, I hope, fingers crossed. Mark Riley, if for whatever reason you're watching and or hearing this, hit me up. You actually mentioned a lot of movies too that are like in your top rankings that I've like. My husband has Dead Man on the Criterion uh
Mm-hmm.
collection, but I've not sat down and watched it. So
Yeah,
and I feel like I'm gonna have to keep you and Taylor Cleek in my back pocket to go back and forth on some more Kubrick films because I still want to explore. It's kind of like my feelings on Paul Thomas Anderson. I've watched the majority of his stuff
yeah.
now. Just he's not for me. Like again, I like one or two things. I loved Magnolia, and then the ending of Magnolia happened, and I'm like, oh,
Did you watch Punch Drunk Love?
I've not watched that one yet. That one's on the list.
I am interested
Um,
to see how you feel about that. I rewatched that recently and was so glad I did. It's also
yeah,
very short for PTA. It's 90 minutes roughly, which is a
yeah,
breeze for him, especially after Magnolia. So
yeah,
he,
or
he
Boogie
did.
Night.
Yeah, well, he did Punch Drunk Love between Magnolia and There Will Be Blood, which is
Mhm.
insane. So
Yeah. Even before I even rank this, I just got to where does Kubrick stand on like your list of favorite directors? Is he up there?
oh yeah, so
Yeah.
like I tell Marisol all the time, I have my four horsemen, and it's Stanley Kubrick, Werner Herzog, Jim Jarmusch, and David Lynch, and those are my
Okay.
guys. Those are my ride or dies. I own every single movie by all of them, with an asterisk with Herzog because some of his films are not they don't make physical copies of.
Sure.
But
Sure.
for all intents and purposes, I own their entire filmographies. I've watched their films multiple times and own books about them. And it's just those four guys. When I was in film school, they were the ones who really got me immersed in film on another level that I didn't realize was possible. And
Mhm.
there are several filmmakers other than them who elicit a similar reaction from me. It's just those guys, when I go back to their stuff, they're operating on a wavelength that's just tapping into something that's universal, and really really special, and I love that I can go back to their films, Kubrick especially, and just always get something out of it, even if I've seen it several times before.
Yeah. Oh, it's awesome. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, with all that being said, I will uh start this ranking, this rating off with, when it comes to film making and the things that he did, 5 stars.
Fair enough.
When it comes to my attention span, not 5 stars. So I think it's fair to kind of cut it right there in the middle ish. And for this watching of it, because I always like to phrase it like I have no problem going back and re-rating things after I sit and let them sit or go watch them again. But I'm probably, for the first episode of 2023, I think I'm coming in at 3 stars on 2001:
Okay,
Space
we can
Odyssey.
build on that, Allison. That's acceptable. I was like, just don't 2.5 me here. All right.
No, 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 no.
Okay.
It's honestly, no. You know what's funny though is I'm telling you, Adam, this is why I started this podcast, because I really was at like a 2 to 2.5 for coming into
Yeah.
this, and I was like, how am I going to break this poor man's heart on my first episode? But having this conversation and talking about it has really made me think more on what I watched,
Well,
and I think that's important. It's not a, you didn't know ahead of time where my feelings were, other than what I had just said on here with it being boring. But hearing you talk about it and pointing things out that I may have missed the intention of, um and two, understanding more about Kubrick as a filmmaker, because I haven't done a deep dive. I just, what I've read on like Wikipedia and talking to friends, because if it's on Wikipedia, it's true. So, you know, it's like, it's just kind of one of those things where the when I hear other people's appreciations for something, there's no reason that it can't sway a thought or have make, where there were multiple times where I sat back thinking on this movie and now going, I mean, I get it. I understand it more now. And so really you kind of, you in general pushed it up a star to a half a star. So
I can live with that. But I also appreciate that it's a gradual appreciation.
yeah,
2001's not a crowd pleaser. It's not
it's
like
not.
a stand up and cheer kind of movie. Not that experience. Um, but you are going into it with a very open mind, which I
Hmm.
appreciate. And the thing is, I'm not here to legislate people's taste. I think if you hate 2001: A Space Odyssey, that's completely valid. Um, the only thing I ask is that even when people find it inaccessible or uninteresting, which does happen, sadly,
Yeah.
um, at least look at it as objectively as you can and appreciate how incredibly crafted this movie is, and its influence is undeniable.
Right.
And you don't have to love it for that influence to be undeniable. And you, trust me, like I said earlier, you're way beyond a lot of folks who dismiss it out of hand, and I appreciate
Yeah.
that. But it is an
Oh,
acquired taste for sure, because it
it
was an acquired
definitely
taste
is.
for me. It took me.
Yeah.
I've been living with this movie most of my life, and to this day, my opinion changes on it, just because my experience changes, and then I look at it and I glean different things.
Yeah. I can't believe we spent this whole time and not once brought up the floating baby at the end. And
Look, yeah, I mean, I saw the space child. I saw the space child in person at the museum.
okay.
They had the model of it, and yeah, I like, more or less. Not that there's multiple ways to interpret that, but I think the most important thing is poor astronaut David Bowman went through it at the end of
He
that
sure
movie. He
did.
really went through it,
He
and he ended
did.
up becoming a baby again. So just give the guy a break. He did it for us.
He did it for us,
Yeah.
for all of us to explore. Well, Adam, with all this being said and done, I think before we say our goodbyes, what do you have going on? Where can people find you?
Yes. My better half and I, Marisol McKee, we started a channel recently called Champs on Film.
Mhm.
I don't know if you heard, but we both were singles champions in the Schmodown once upon a time. And we still have a lot of opinions about movies, a lot of things we have to say. So we decided to start our own home base. So please go on YouTube, look up at Champs on Film, subscribe, hit that little bell, all that good stuff. We have our first episode out already, which is a deep dive on the 30th anniversaries of the 1992 films Singles by Cameron Crowe and Deep Cover, directed by Bill Duke. One's a romantic comedy, one's a modern film noir. They're both great in different ways. And it was a really fun retrospective on movies that are 30 years old, but still feel incredibly vibrant and interesting. And
Awesome.
we have our top films of 2022 coming out soon. Might be a two-parter, so just brace yourselves. We had a lot to say about the movies this year, but that's going to come out in the very foreseeable future, so stay tuned on Champs on Film. And then we're on Twitter. I'm at Eisenthor. She's at Marisol Miraya, Marisol _ Miraya, Miriah. I'm at AIZANTHOR. And then Champs on Film is at Champs on Film on Twitter and YouTube. Thank you.
Amazing. I love that. I love you plugging your wonderful partner because she is absolutely fantastic.
She's the
I
heartbeat
adore
of
her.
that channel. She's our editor and our editor-in-chief.
I love it.
And she makes me look good. So, yeah.
Amazing. Well, and thank you guys so much too for everyone watching here on YouTube or listening on your audio platform of choice. Please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review if you're listening on audio. If you're watching here on the Flick and Reel YouTube channel, please be sure to like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button along with the bell icon to get notified anytime we have new content drop. You can follow me, your host, at Allison Salamone on Twitter, and you can follow the show at Never Seen It FNR. And until next time, my friends, be safe. I now need to go watch even more movies. See ya.